Welcome to Galaxy Forum. I'm your host, Melissa Kaplan, and we are here to explore issues and ideas that matter to the LCC galaxy, to discover how the work of our stars connects with the community and how the community connects with us. With this episode, my co-host and I are launching a series called Topsy Turvy, because sometimes that's just how the world seems. This past summer, I couldn't get those words out of my head as I tried to decipher the truth in all the information that's coming at me and everybody else. And often I was shocked at the things, sometimes really maybe little small untruths and sometimes large conspiracy theories that people believe. I'm so excited that the perfect person to co-host instantly jumped on board, someone who has great expertise in media literacy and who really has a passion for research, LCC's information literacy librarian, Ami Ewald.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm so happy that you asked, and I get to be a part of this because we are living in a very sort of topsy-turvy world right now and a lot of different things coming at us. So I think this is going to be a fun opportunity to talk about some misinformation, about truth, conspiracy theories, all sorts of fun stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting because, people might say they have different definitions for truth and conspiracy theories, and I know we're going to get into that. And I think one of our goals, as we've talked about it, is like each episode we're going to look at a conspiracy theory or a group of conspiracy theories, and we're going to have an expert join us to kind of consider what's behind that, and then offer listeners some tips, viewers. I always think podcast is only listening, but I know we have the video ability these days. So welcome to all of you too who are watching. So we thought that it would be great though to start our conversation without necessarily focusing on a specific theory, but getting at a little bit of why might people succumb to conspiracy theories, and who better to be our expert than somebody who knows about the human mind. And so we've invited Mike Stratton, psychotherapist, to be our guest. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here with you guys.
So I just want to say before we get into the topic that Mike, psychotherapist, also an author, and also has a podcast that he co-hosts here on LCC Connect.
A Psychodelicious Conversation, with Morgan Bowen. And we talk about different varieties of mental health, the world of mental health and consciousness and psychology, all sorts of things. I've
listened a little bit, and you guys have great rapport, and it's just such such a never-ending source of need and information in terms of mental health.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's never ending. It's all encompassing. Yeah.
And though it doesn't, it does relate to mental health a little bit, but Mike also hosts a jazz music podcast. I mean, mental health.
It's not a podcast. Well,
not a podcast. It's a radio show.
A radio show, Groove Supreme, over on WKAR every Saturday night, and it's a jazz show which has a little bit of flavor of blues and some soul every now and then as well.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
And it is good for your mental health. Jazz is music.
Yeah, so. Music is always good for the mental health, right?
Yeah. So I'm turning to you, Ami, our media literacy person and researcher in terms of conspiracy theories. Is there such a thing as even a broad? I mean, there's a zillion different theories out there.
Yeah, there's lots of different theories in that, but let's just kind of start with a broad definition. Like, what constitutes a conspiracy theory? And if I took a look at the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and a conspiracy theory, a theory that explains an event or set of circumstances as the result of a secret plot by usually powerful conspirators, or a theory asserting that a secret of great importance is being kept from the public. And interesting enough too, that term conspiracy theory actually was first known use was in 1863. So it's been around for a while. I always have this image too of the person with the handlebar mustache sort of sitting back, twirling his mustache, or the Mr. Burns type character, sort of plotting all of these things. So that's kind of a broad definition of what a conspiracy theory is. And, they vary from being political, on the political side of things, pop culture. Oftentimes when we have sort of these unexplained, tragic events that occur, we'll see, conspiracy theories rise, definitely, or events that are happening around us that are very chaotic, and we want to put a reason behind it.
Yeah. When you guys asked me to do this, and I'm thrilled to be here again, and it's a lot of fun. I want to start at a really deep place, but also at a really wide place as well, that we all engage in some of this. We all engage in some level of conspiracy theories. The depth of it, though, is that we're really talking about consciousness. How does the world land on our nerve endings? How do we experience the world? What kind of network of whatever it is that we have to go through to make sense of the world. And Freud originally, when he was very young, and he started to develop defense mechanisms, so repression, denial, projection, all these ways that people had to defend themselves against how scary the world was. He made this statement that the truth of it is that the world is so unpredictable, it is so random, it is so at times catastrophic, that if people really let that in, they would go crazy. They wouldn't be able to function. They wouldn't be able to operate.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to have a set of beliefs that the world is kind of ordered in a certain way. And then when something chaotic happens, that you have to have an explanation for it. You have to understand that. So one of the ways that I think about it is that it's all on a continuum. So some of it is just as simple as superstition. Anyone out there who's a sports fan is also a conspiracy theorist, because, we got jobbed by the refs. That's what happened. The game was fixed. This is why. Anyway, on the one hand, there's that. So it can be really harmless. And then it can be to the point where it's dangerous. It can be dangerous to yourself or to other people. And an example of that is the witch hunts, that occurred, the actual witch hunt. Something's going on wrong in the village, and we think it's because of these women, and they must be witches, and so we need to figure out which ones are witches, and then burn them or kill them or drown them or whatever it was that was going on. That's a conspiracy theory. That they didn't have a label for it, maybe, but that was definitely a conspiracy theory. So.
Yeah, I like your point too, that I think at some point we've all maybe believed in a conspiracy theory or something, out of the ordinary. And at the same time, I do often think it's good to question things, right? Mm-hmm. And to question the order or what we're being told. So there's always that fine line. But I think we've all sort of, whether it's pop culture or sports or something, but I think we've all probably engaged with something at some point.
Paul is dead. Right. That's a great example, too, out of pop culture. That idea that Paul McCartney died, and then all the Beatles fans were looking for clues as to, he's barefooted on the cover of the Abbey Road. So that's proof of it. Yeah. And there was a driver or a license plate that said 28 if, so he would be 28 if he was still alive. For instance, that's an example of it. That's something that's pretty harmless, but they had to come out. He had to come out and say, "Look, I'm still alive. I'm still here."
Yeah, definitely. It's really. It makes me think too that some people probably have. That yes, the world is an unpredictable place and awful things happen, and some people may have either a greater ability to deal with that uncertainty or some sort of result. I don't know. What do you think? Because I'm thinking some people are more likely to or more prone to be caught up in this, but maybe it's at different points in your life where you're more vulnerable.
I think that's true. I do a lot of work with trauma, and in the midst of someone going through a traumatic event, they will often make a decision about what's true in their life, and it's often a negative belief about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do a kind of therapy, for instance, EMDR, where you're getting to the root of the trauma and helping someone reprocess it, that cognition or that thought comes up, and you can see that they've held on to a false belief about themselves that's been limiting to them. So that's like in an individual sense. There's other things that are personality traits that people who believe in a lot of conspiracy theories tend to be more fearful, highly anxious, fearful to the point of paranoia, of just this is world ending, this is threatening everything. And that they tend to be more antagonistic. They experience themselves as powerless. They are often have a sense of isolation. So the different theories about conspiracy theory is that it gives people a sense of belonging. It gives them a sense of control. It gives them a sense of like, I know what's going on. I know what's going on and you don't know what's going on. So they feel good about themselves, in that way. Now, again, I mean, all of us, though, it's interesting because...
and I like that all of us point too. I think it's really important to remember we're on this big continuum.
Oh, my gosh. We all engage in some level of confirmation bias. We all have to have a certain level of shorthand internally. Who do we... these people are like this. These people are like this, and that can get into, bigotry at the far end of it. On the other hand, it's like making assumptions, and sometimes it's comical, that comedies do that a lot, where you just see somebody who doesn't fit the kind of stereotype. They play against the stereotype. And it's funny because it's like, oh gosh, we all thought that. We all thought these people were like this, or these people were like this. But that confirmation bias is something that everyone has to some degree, and even though we want to deny it, it's true. So that's a big one.
Yeah. Your point about, I think of people oftentimes trying to fit in. In fact, I even had that written in my notes of I think sometimes believing in these things creates almost a sense of belonging. Mm-hmm. And when you start to get into social media and all the stuff online, right, that you almost form these groups that are, really gung-ho on this. This is what they believe, and that creates that sense of belonging. And I think in many cases might help to ease loneliness. Yeah. And a sense of isolation. And coming back around to that confirmation bias, definitely you start hearing the same thing that kind of reaffirms what you already might be thinking, and then you're finding a group of people that are just sort of confirming that for you as well. And our social media and all of anything online really is dealing with those algorithms that are just helping to push that confirmation bias. It's going to float those things to the top that you watched one video on this, you're probably pretty interested, and then it's going to keep floating those things that just sort of reconfirm those beliefs.
It reinforces it.
Yeah, reinforces it.
Those algorithms, they know us better than we know ourselves, and they continue to feed that. And the way that one of the things that's changed over the years is that the institutions that people used to have and that they used to belong to have faded. So church used to be a huge thing. People belonged to a church. They all their friends, their family, they all went to the same church. They all believed the same thing. For instance, with church attendance being so far down now, what do people believe in? Sporting events are hugely popular. People can put on a jersey and okay, I belong. I'm a Spartan. I'm a Lions fan. I'm a Tiger fan. And it just, there it is. All you have to do is get a jersey and turn on the television.
Broadway show, people who are huge. Yeah. I mean, not only Broadway theater, but Broadway is probably the most popular and most, accessible of those performances, and people just flock to it and build whole communities and whole new ways of gathering together to celebrate their love of that and their community, their affinity for each other.
Deadheads, You
Yeah.
know, Grateful Dead. I know a lot of jazz people that look at the Grateful Dead like, how'd they do that? How do they get people to follow them from city to city to city?
I think it was the grilled cheese sandwiches.
Do you think that was?
My sister, she was a Deadhead, and she took me. I willingly went and had a great time. We had like third row seats, and but the best part is the parking. Then I don't know when this is off topic, but probably when was it, like 90s, 80s? Whenever I don't know when Jerry Garcia died, but parking lots full of people with these just like little stands making grilled cheese and and other things too.
Handing them out.
Handing them out, and that was delightful community.
Were they magic? Were they magical grilled cheese? Not?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was a great experience. Yeah, but anyway, that community, you whether you are deep into it, you can get caught up in any number of ways. And if you are seeking a sense of belonging, even if you're not fearful, that's another way in to suddenly be part of a group of beliefs that may not necessarily be based on truth. And nobody, well, air quotes, because truth.
Yeah.
Truth, the truthiness. Yeah.
The truth is out there.
And not to get overly political, but there was a period of time not too long ago where, they were talking about alternate facts, so there's facts, but then there's alternate facts. They're the facts that we want you to believe. So the idea of propaganda, for instance, propaganda initially wasn't a negative term. It was originally like associated with the Catholic Church because they would propagate. They would propagate their truth. They would propose it and propagate it. And it became a negative term, I think, around the time of Nazi Germany and with the Soviet Union, and then we have our own varieties of that are political now. Just believe this, don't believe the other people, and it's heated up to the extent that there's this demonization of the other side. It's really gotten very, very hot. That each side believes the other side is going to destroy America, for instance. And the things that we know about, with social media or any media, what gets people to tune in, the two main emotions is fear and anger. If you can tap those areas of the brain becomes very interested in that for self-protection. Just like what are they saying now? What's going on now? What's happening now? So we are in a period of time when I think the idea of conspiracy theories are more relevant than ever, that even though it does affect all of us, the ability to be able to detect what's really true and what's not, and to be able to break through that is also more important than ever. But people will, when they belong to a group. So there was an experiment. I'll tell you about this experiment that was interesting. The Milgram studies years ago is a study where they would have someone in a separate room, and they would be giving them a quiz, and every time they got the quiz wrong, they'd get an electric shock. And they would do that and increase the shock every single time, and they'd hear the person scream in the other room, but they'd continue to do it because a man with a lab coat was standing over them. And if a man in a lab coat says continue the experiment, some people would draw away from the experiment, but a lot of them would continue it until the guy became silent. The assumption was he's unconscious or he's dead, and the person would continue to shock. So
wow. So
they did another experiment where they said, how do people go along with this? How do people give their will over to somebody in authority? How did they do that? And so they did a study with groups of people where they would have they'd have an experimental study that would go into a group, and there'd be 10 people that were sitting in a little audience, and they'd be looking at a screen, and they'd say, this is an experiment about perception, and we're going to show you two lines, and you tell us which line is shorter and which line is longer. And so they'd go through that a couple of times, and it was very obvious which one was longer and which one was shorter. And then they got closer together, and what would happen is that the 10 people that were in on it would all agree that the shorter line was longer. And the person that had gone into the room, they might disagree with them like a couple times, but eventually they would start agreeing with people. They would deny their own their own reality testing to be part of. They didn't want to be abnormal. They didn't want to stand out. So if you're in a social milieu that everybody believes, fill in the blank, chances are you're going to believe that, and you may want to defend those beliefs.
So how do you? We have about 5 minutes left, so definitely want to. I know, it flies. How does one sort of defend themselves against that? And I know that might get to some of your tips, but I also want to make sure we have a chance to talk just a little bit about if you have a friend or a loved one who you feel is really being caught up, and what do you do? 2 questions.
Do you want to take that? You have tips.
Well, one thing I'd like to kind of going back to what you were just talking about there was about sort of when you hear something over and over and over again, you tend to start believing it, right?
Yes.
Then it becomes true. And I think in terms of dealing with, family members or, having relatives, friends who might believe something that you think that is just not true. I always tend to think if you value that relationship, show a little empathy. Maybe ask some questions. Why do they believe that? Listen. I think once you start attacking somebody, well, why do you believe that? And you take that stance, they're going to dig in and they're not going to hear you. So I think my biggest takeaway or tip would be, have some empathy, listen, and then maybe if there's little points where you can sort of interject a counter idea or a counter opinion, you're probably not going to be able to debunk that whole theory for them that they believe in. But maybe you can just poke some holes in it a little bit. And again, I wouldn't don't go attack and have an argument about it. I think it's more about listening, having a little empathy, maybe pointing out some counter claims or a different way of thinking, a different perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting if we can apply this. I mean, one example is politics, but to get away from politics, one kind of therapy that I do is something called motivational interviewing, and it's talking to people who have an abuse with a substance, and so they're often very, very defended around that. And so exactly what you're saying is to help tease out for them what they like most about it. And when someone feels free to express that and they feel like they're listened to and they're attended to, they're a lot more open to say, is there anything about this that you don't like? Is there any part of this that makes you uneasy? And then they start to express that as well. But some of the skills they talk about is to roll with resistance, to avoid argumentation. And if anything, sometimes maybe you can develop some discrepancy that on the one hand you're saying this is really important to you, but then there's this thing, I mean, how do you figure that, or how do you broach that, and let them talk, and when all else fails, you just say, let's agree not to talk about
right,
this.
Let's move on from that conversation.
Thanksgiving, we're not going to talk about politics or religion. Those are the hot topics, I think, that we just don't talk about. So that we can still be friends in other ways, and we have it. We see things differently in this other area. But and that used to be normal, and it kind of hasn't been over the last 10 years or so. I feel like we're in Harry Potter, like Voldemort, he who cannot be named. We're avoiding saying the name, right. But we know what we're talking about with this.
Things are so much more combative, and
much more.
And all the information that's flying at us, whether certainly social media, the internet, we know, everybody knows that is a huge fire hose, but yet it's not, it's very well controlled, as we've said. So boy, there's a lot to this, and I think compassion, and I think, like I said, understanding that there's a continuum for all of us. We all have things we believe that somebody else is going to say, I disagree, but there are things that are that aren't real that people believe, and that's the land of conspiracy theory. So Mike, we could keep talking, but
yeah,
we're,
I hope you'll come back and
I'd love to come back. Yeah.
that would be
talk some more
wonderful.
with us.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great first episode of
I think
Topsy
so,
Turvy,
yeah.
and
And I think we're going to have some good conversations and some interesting stuff, some fun things. Even talked about some fun stuff today too. So
yeah. Well, Mike Stratton, psychotherapist, thanks so much for being our guest on this first this launch.
Thank you for inviting me.
You are welcome. And thank you all for listening. And if you want to hear this episode again and all the LCC Connect programming, go to lccconnect.org. And also want to thank our technical producer, Dedalian Lowry, and Andy Callis, who composed the theme music. I'm Melissa Kaplan.
And I'm Ami Ewald.
And you've been listening to Galaxy Forum Topsy Turvy.